Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Smith, Chair of the Toronto Community Housing Board's Governance, Communications and Human Resources Committee. Welcome to the public session of today's committee meeting. We apologize for a short delay as we had some technical difficulties. In light of the need for social distancing to limit the spread of COVID-19, we are holding this committee meeting virtually. The GCHRC meeting was originally scheduled for April the 5th, 2022. However, unfortunately, I was ill and unfortunately had to cancel at the last minute, and I apologize for that change that was required. And I hope you've been able to join us today as a result, because we did not have quorum at that time. TCHC management have worked with myself and other committee members to reschedule this meeting for today, April the 20th. I'd like to make the land acknowledgements. Let me begin with an acknowledgement that the land each of us is on as we hold this virtual meeting is traditionally the territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, Métis peoples, and we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. During the public session today, there is one report for information, which is the standing report on City Council directions, recurring board attention. 3 reports are put forward for the committee's approval and comment, including the review of board committees' charters, annual general meeting process for TCHC and the subsidiaries, and the board and committee meetings, rules and procedures. The deputations and voting process, members of the public wanting to depute on any agenda item on today's agenda had the option to do so either by submitting a written deputation or being teleconferenced into today's meeting to orally depute to the board members. The final deputation summary will be sent has been sent to us, and hopefully we have included, and everybody will be able to join us. The following deputations who requested the opportunity to depute at the originally scheduled meeting have been advised of the opportunity to do so today and at this rescheduled meeting. City Council directions requiring board attention. We have 2 deputants on item 2D, William Lohman and Catherine Wilkinson. On item 3, business arising from the public meeting minutes and action items update for Catherine Wilkinson. And on item 6, the board and committee meetings, rules and procedures, Catherine Wilkinson, Kathy Birch, Jackie Yu, and we had one additional inclusion, which is Miguel Evelyn Vela. And we will look forward to hearing from each of them at the appropriate, during the appropriate item. First, we're going to look at the approval of the agenda and review the agenda order. I will now ask to review the public consent agenda items and public regular agenda items as they're listed on the agenda. So consent items 2A, approval of public meeting agenda, confirmation of the public meeting minutes of January 23rd, and the item 2D, I think we do have a deputant on that, so we'll hold that item. So could I have a motion to approve the approval of the agenda and the minutes of the January 31st? I can't see who's there, so please speak up because I can't see anyone.
I'll move, Brian.
Okay, moved by Uba, seconded by Marcel. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Motion is carried. So Dara, I think we would at this point have the deputants for 2D before we move on that item. Is that correct? You're on mute.
Correct. The first deputant on item 2D is Bill Lohman, and I believe Mr. Lohman is on the line. Mr. Lohman, are you with us?
I am.
You have 5 minutes for your deputation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to address you today. My name is Bill Lohman. I'm here today because many of Toronto Housing and the seniors housing operational shared agreements have direct impact on the quality and level of service that senior tenants receive. In the members' motion 3851 by City Council, it directs that the STAC committee provide the continuity of leadership and ensure that senior tenants can directly access, inform, and influence the service and programs to be provided by the new corporation. And management's recommendation is that Toronto Housing is supporting the city's motion. So how so? There's been a total disinterest for the engagement needs of isolated seniors and negligible staff support, example being seniors' efforts to access arbitrarily available off and on engagement tenant action funds compared to exuberant support flowing into the family buildings. Toronto Housing's attitude towards the STAC has been dismissive, and the treatment of senior tenants by the Refresh Engagement Committee over these past 3 years has been nothing short of derelict. The concern at this point is over the past year, numerous requests by STAC members for inclusion and access have been met with rock-hard indifference. And to this day, those requests and other tenant attempts to include the voice of seniors have been rejected in spite of Council's direction and Toronto Housing's own stated commitment to do everything to ensure a smooth and successful transition. It cannot be said that Toronto Housing adhered to City Council's direction for that STAC to inform, influence, or be included in any decisions of consequence, as defined by those words of inform and influence, which I've attached for the sake of clarity. And as the committee that drafts the policies to govern the actions and responsibilities for the corporation employees, why are there no mechanisms that ensure staff's accountability to the tenants that they're paid to serve? Now, I'd speak on item 6 for a moment, if I may. And I'm talking about item 714 says that the public shall be permitted to make an oral deputation in relation to any matter that was not previously considered at the committee meeting. And then 17.15 says that all reports to the board and committee are to include an overview of the stakeholder engagement process, some sense of stakeholder inputs so that directors can be aware of what stakeholders have said with respect to that item, and to include an overview of deputations received at that committee level. Until Toronto Housing adheres to those current expectations and faithfully complies with and follows the accountability set out in 715, any action on 714 is just limiting tenant expression. And considering that the agenda information you want now to be posted 7 days before, you want written permission to have at least 3 days ahead of the meeting to allow for enough time for distribution. That only gives deputants 3 days to prepare instead of the current 6. So how is that not impeding or diminishing the ability of tenants to prepare and be heard on issues of importance? In a way, you are claiming as much time to be able to read a deputation as the effort and the time permitted or that's been permitted to draft it. So making changes to the deputation policy for the purpose of expediency and efficiencies is clearly detrimental to tenants' interest. And it deprives tenants of the ability to be heard by the board as the legislation intends. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Bill. I'd like to ask if there are any committee members who would like to ask Bill any questions with regards to his deputation.
There are no questions. We have
a second. We have a second deputant on this item, and that's Catherine Wilkinson, if she's available.
I believe Ms. Wilkinson's on the line.
Please proceed, Kathleen, when you're ready.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
So first of all, don't start the clock. I have important information to share with you regarding the naming of our buildings. This is become a common practice almost across the portfolio, and typically tenants would do a petition taking up a petition that they want their building renamed in honor of a previous tenant that served or helped in that community. That petition then gets presented to the city councilor, who takes it to the city, they review it, and then they send it back to Toronto Community Housing, or in the instance you're talking about, it may be sending it back to the seniors board or corporation, and it can unfold that way. I just want to let you know it's been done in the past. Several times I've been a part of some of those decisions, and it really is important to the tenants. So while the board may not think it's appropriate, let me tell you that in our communities, the tenants really want to honor those that honored and respected them in their community. So I just want to put that out there.
Just one quick question, Catherine. Has any of that been documented, or is that just
Absolutely
a practice?
And you know who will know it right off the hop is Councillor Paula Fletcher.
Okay.
Because she worked on a couple of renaming our buildings.
And were they only seniors buildings, or were they family buildings as well?
No, it happened to be a family building, but I'm not sure that we had separate rules. We were all one corporation, so I don't know if the rules changed now that we're going to be two.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So
okay,
please
so
proceed
you can't
with
start
your
my clock yet. You can start it now, though.
Yes, we will.
Okay, Dara. All right, I wanted to talk to item 2D around the council directions. This is an excellent report. I'm so glad to see it. It offers invaluable information to help the board make important decisions about the future with discussions taking place at City Hall. But the important issue I want to raise is the importance of timely communications with our tenants. We do know that recently was brought to light regarding the capital facilities agreement between the city and TCHC in 2012, and how it has severely impacted tenants, 54,000 tenants, both emotionally and financially, because they were not aware of that agreement. Now, I do understand Toronto Community Housing, City Hall, and other levels of government are working towards a solution on this issue, and I hope it will be both expedient and satisfactory to tenants. With that in mind, we're now discussing another capital facilities agreement. But I want to take you back to 2011 when Toronto Community Housing proposed the sale of all single-family homes, which you are familiar with, but they did not inform the tenants who were living in those homes. Imagine what happened. The media got a hold of it, tenant advocates got a hold of it. There was so much pushback, and they lined up before the board, and there was a 5-hour board meeting because we failed to communicate with the tenants that we were considering selling their homes. Ultimately, we know these houses are now remaining in the nonprofit sector in perpetuity, but we cannot allow history to repeat itself again. I give you those examples for a good reason, because now we know that the city and GCHC have entered into an agreement, municipal capital facilities agreement, to have these houses be tax exempt. But we should not say, oh, let's not tell the tenants now because it doesn't affect them yet. We know it's a done deal. It's a part of the transfer. So it's important that the tenants that living in these single family homes are aware this decision has been made, how and when it affects them. Once the properties are transferred, that's up to the new housing provider to manage. Looking at the air conditioning members' motion that was discussed, I really appreciate them bringing that to the table. The air conditioning exchange program was geared towards tenants who had an air conditioner, and so if you didn't have one, you could not participate. And Toronto Community Housing often mirrors Ottawa housing policies, which allows floor model ACs for windows without a balcony, and continues to allow tenants to have a window AC over a balcony. And this is especially important for seniors and tenants with disabilities. Should this item be adopted at City Hall, and even if it is not, as a result of the increased extreme heat alerts that we're all experiencing in Toronto, I would hope that Toronto Community Housing would consider the comfort of all of their tenants by providing them with at minimum a floor model AC. And the decision should not be based on whether or not a tenant can afford one. A cooling room does not work well as an alternative because tenants cannot sleep in a cooling room in a community room. And while this item is being considered at City Hall, it may be helpful for the Tenant Services Committee to receive an update on how that air conditioning exchange program is going. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the pest management strategy, and I'm very disappointed to hear the negativity because I actually think we have a best-in-class pest management strategy, and that's not because I dedicated many years of my life to bringing it about, and I worked with some great staff who made that possible. However, there's been a big turnover in staff, and so, you know, it might be reasonable to consider some refresher training, but I think it should go beyond the site staff. It should also include supervisors and middle managers as well. They need to understand not just the cost, but the impact and the time and resources it takes to manage pest issues in our communities. We also need to revisit what supplies we're providing to tenants to prepare for pest treatment, particularly in the case of bed bugs. And it's critical that we need to communicate with tenants about pests. Education should not come once a tenant gets pests. It should be proactive and educate them on how to avoid them and how to manage them. Okay, don't click me off yet. Remind tenants it's a requirement of their lease to report pests and a responsibility for the landlord to provide treatment. The biggest challenge we have is changing human behavior and working with vulnerable tenants. But with education and the right supports, we can and we will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Are there any questions from committee members? Yes, Uba?
Thanks, Catherine, and thanks, Ms. Loman. And I agree with Catherine, and I heard some people who lives in houses and townhouses who were offered one air condition. So if management can look into that again, I know we did an amazing job because we provide a lot of much needed air conditioners, but I don't think it's enough. So if some staff members can look into that, that would be great. Also, Mr. Lohman, I remember previous deputations, he had the same concern that he mentioned today, which is lack of communication and feeling of not consulting with seniors and tenants. If also someone can reach out to him, and maybe next time we're doing anything in the senior buildings, so to, you know, consult with. I'm sure we're making every effort to do that, but, you know, maybe to talk to him and see what he would like to see maybe different, or how we can improve that work that we're already doing. That was my just to comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uba. Any further questions? Comments? Hearing none. Need a motion to receive that, Tara?
Yes, we do.
So if I could have a motion to receive item
2D.
2D. Moved by let's see. Oh, Uba, seconded by Marcel. Thank you very much. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 3, I believe that's
The item 3 is the action item update, and we also have Ms. Wilkinson indicated that she would like to depute in relation to that item.
great. Thanks very much. So we have item 3, business arising, and Catherine, if you, Catherine Wilkinson, if you'd like to speak to that, this is your.
Right. Thank you very much, Brian and Dara. Okay, so I wanted to speak to the action item list, item 1, where we look at the issues regarding vendors for TCHC. We often hear value for money and bulking of similar jobs. So, for instance, if you're replacing windows in a couple of buildings, or you're redoing balconies, what happens is we bulk them. We put, 3 or 4 buildings together, and we put it out to bid, and then the vendors bid on it. Of course, lowest price gets the job. But this may be inadvertently creating a barrier for mid-size and smaller vendors to bid on our work, because the scope is such, a small to mid-sized vendor would never be able to dream to take on 4 or 5 buildings. They just would absolutely never have the capacity to do so. So, while bulking multiple buildings might get Toronto Community Housing more bang for its buck, at what cost to tenants? Working on multiple jobs simultaneously results in contractors flitting from building to building, dabbling at the work, which they now have several months to complete. This results in an undue hardship and stress on tenants, particularly when unit access is needed, or balconies are blocked off for several months at a time, in addition to the noise impact to the neighboring community. So what if a scope of work that causes tenant disruption was capped at a maximum of 2 buildings? Would something like that perhaps open the bidding process to smaller or new vendors that previously could not apply? We would still get value for money, the work would be finished sooner, and the disruption to tenants would be minimized. The other piece I wanted to touch on, I'm sure this is a broken record, but the vendors that we use for tenant engagement are while big box vendors can agree to a 30-day invoice payment, smaller local vendors and stores cannot be used, as they cannot afford to operate that way. So there must be some way that we could compromise, that we can make this work, because it's unfortunate as the local providers actually offer more affordable pricing and better value for money, and we're just not able to tap into them. So I don't know what the solution is. If anybody knows how to stretch a dollar, it's the tenants that live in Toronto Community Housing. So much of the independent decision-making has been removed from tenants, as staff have become the in-house order desk for corporate vendors. But this results in missed items, back orders, and multiple delivery charges that could be avoidable, all of which would be eliminated if tenants were provided with, for instance, a gift card, store credit, or cash to shop locally and submit the receipts within 14 days. Now, I know this has been done in the past, and there were a couple of instances where receipts are not turned in, but one bad apple should not spoil it for all. There is a workaround, and I really think we could find it if we put our minds to it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Are there any questions for Catherine? Uba?
Do we, I just, it's just a question. Do we have a tenant as a vendors, or how does that process work? And I remember asking earlier, I don't know if it was me and I think, I don't know, it was Debbie or someone else. We asked to have the breakdown of all the vendors that we get. Who are they? I mean, what background, what have you, and to see how many diverse people. So I don't think we ever get that list. We never get that data. But my question now is, do we give opportunity to tenants to become vendors?
Well, I think it relates to our process. And Dara, I don't know whether you can comment on that. It's not.
So I believe we do, TCHC does from time to time retain tenants to provide services, goods or services to the organization. The request that Director Farah that you mentioned to provide demographic data for tenants, I think the action item we indicate that request will be reported back on as part of a divisional CABR work plan from our procurement unit. At the upcoming board meeting, I think there is a report that on tenant action funds that may touch on tenants who provide goods and services through that program. So the short answer to your question is we do from time to time retain tenants to provide services to TCHC.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Dara, also, if you could comment with regards, because I know it's a challenging process because we go through our procurement policy that we need to abide by, but the issue of mid-size vendors versus bulking up, I mean, there's obviously a cost is a concern, but also trying to have tenants impact minimized as much as possible is also a concern. I just didn't know whether you had any comments on that, or whether that's something we could ask procurement to get back to us on with regards to other ways of looking at improving the procurement process to ensure that not just large corporations can participate, but hopefully mid-size as well, and whether breaking contracts up into smaller chunks is one way to do that or not, I don't know. But maybe we could ask procurement to report back with regards to any improvements in the process that could achieve both on tenant impacts as well as the cost.
So I'll take that away, and we'll come back with the report to report on that.
Okay.
Thanks, Roseanne.
Yeah, thanks, Roseanne. I didn't see it there. Thank you. Okay, if there's no, I don't think there's anything else on the business arising, Dara.
That's
So
correct.
we'll look for a motion to receive the business arising items. Thank you. Moved by Marcel. Okay, thank you. Seconded by Uba. Great. All those in favor? The motion's carried. Thank you. Item 4, review of board and committee charters. We have two, I believe, deputies, Catherine Wilkinson
No.
and Miguel
Sorry.
Alba.
Mr. Chair, I think the next deputy are on item 6.
On item 6 of
So I don't believe we have deputants on items 4 and 5.
we don't? Oh, okay, maybe I wrote it down then. Oh yes, that's right, sorry. I wrote 4 instead of 6, thank you. Okay, so we'll go on to item 4.
So item 4, and I think I can be fairly quick in summarizing this report. On an annual basis, TCHC reviews the charter documents for the board and its committees. This time around, we are not proposing any changes to any of the charters. I will note that as part of the work plan for the Building Investment, Finance and Audit Committee, there is a plan to bring back a report addressing our procurement rules, and that report may have implications for the charter for the Procurement Awards Committee and potentially the BIFAC Committee itself. But that report remains outstanding at this point in time. So at this point, we are simply asking for the committee to approve the charter and mandate documents and forward to the board for its approval, the board charter, the board chair mandate, the vice chair mandate, and the charter for the governance committee, and to approve committee charters for Tenant Services Committee and BIFAC, and direct those charters to those specific committees so they can consider whether they want to see any changes made to them. And then as well approve the Procurement Award Committee Charter, which is attachment 7, the Investment Advisory Committee Charter, and forward those to BIFAC for their approval because both have their take their authority from BIFAC, and then to amend the Community Safety Advisory, so there is one minor amendment, in order to identify the term that the subcommittee would be operative, to forward that to Tenant Services and the board for its approval. So what we're asking there in relation to the document that is attachment 9, and I think really the request is that we forward the charter to Tenant Services Committee for its consideration and request that they provide for the term, because the Community Safety Advisory Subcommittee is described at page 59 and 60 as a time-limited committee, and with a term that is to be determined. And so I think just for the sake of our due diligence, understanding how long that subcommittee should exist, the Tenant Services Committee should be asked to identify what that term will be as part of the approval process. So those are the approvals that we're requesting Governance Committee to grant today, so that we can further the process of getting the various committee and board charter documents approved.
Great. Thanks very much for summarizing that, Dara. Can I have a motion to approve those recommendations? So thank you, Uba, seconded by Marcel. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item 5, the annual general meeting process for TCHC and its subsidiaries. Sarah, if you just want to summarize that, if there's any things we need to note.
I don't believe there's anything that is particularly noteworthy in this report. This is the annual process that we engage with as an organization, to review our process for conducting annual general meetings for TCHC and its various subsidiaries. For the subsidiaries, we manage that process internally through a series of committee meetings or through a subcommittee meetings. And in relation to the annual general meeting of the Toronto Community Housing, we're looking for the board to authorize the committee on, or authorize the president and CEO with the recommendation of the committee to represent TCHC, to conduct those hearings or those meetings, and to take the actions necessary to convene the annual general meeting of TCHC as well, with the cooperation of its shareholder, the City of Toronto.
Are there any questions? Hearing none, move the motion to to approve the recommendations in the report, being the annual general meeting process for GCHC and its subsidiary reports, and to recommend their approval by the board. All those in, can I have a mover? Uba? Seconder Marcel? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 6, we have a number of deputations for item number 6. Dara, do you want to make a comment first, or would we just move right through to the deputations?
So I'm happy to provide quick context. The report that you have today provides an amended version of the rules that were previously presented to GCHRC in the early spring or the spring, early fall of 2021. We've been through a process at the direction of the committee to revise those rules to make them more accessible, to engage in a series of focus group meetings with deputants in relation to proposed changes to the deputation process, and to reach out to city staff at the clerks and tenants first unit level to engage in discussions to ensure that the city was satisfied with the changes that were being proposed, because the direction that we have is that once approved by the board, our rules, the TCHC board rules, would require approval by City Council in the form of a new bylaw for TCHC. So we want to ensure that the city staff, who will likely be asked by Council to comment on this document, don't have any concerns. We haven't heard any concerns in that context. So today we're asking for the committee to approve and recommend to the board that it approve the recommended rules. There is one change that we will ask the committee to consider, and it's really related to a concern that I think one of the deputants you heard from earlier raised. Mr. Lohman identified an aspect of the deputation process that frankly was a holdover from the earlier version of the document and should have been amended to be deleted, which is that in the board, in the rules with respect to deputations in section 17.4, we kept in a sentence that said the public would be permitted to make oral deputations in relation to any matter that wasn't previously considered at a committee meeting. And that sentence should have been removed from the version of the rules that's before committee today. And so we'll ask the committee, when it considers the rules, to approve them subject to deleting that sentence, which means the effect of which is that deputants would continue to have the ability to depute on all items on the board agenda, whether or not they had been previously considered by committee. We don't intend to limit deputants only to committee in relation to those matters. We understand that that's an important issue for deputants, and we don't propose to change that practice. So with that, I believe that the first, so it's you can see the language on the screen there. It's the second sentence in section 17.4 that we're proposing to have the board or the committee delete when it sends this matter to the board. So with that, the first deputant I think we have is Ms. Wilkinson.
Catherine, if you're ready, please depute.
I'm here.
Great.
Can you hear
Thank you.
me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. So I just want to point out, it's really important when you're presenting these kinds of reports to identify the changes in the existing documents. The materials should indicate they are draft. This is the exact same report that was sent at the last meeting. It's the exact same one that's sitting on your website right now. It does not say it's draft. There is no date on it. How does anybody know what version we're looking at? Any changes should be readily identifiable to the reader. I do appreciate that Dara has taken the time to point out the 3 or 4 changes he wishes to make, but that the procedural rules needs a whole lot more work than those 3 areas. So speaking to the covering report, I am pleased management will not change the way in which deputations are received at board and committees. And as a publicly funded corporation, stakeholders should never have had to fight management for the right to speak to the board of directors. Changes in registration requirements. So let me ask you something. When is it acceptable for management to change a board policy? The answer is never. In fact, long before COVID came along, the deputation policy for stakeholders, which is a board policy, was changed by the previous CEO, requiring stakeholders to register by noon the day before a meeting. This has now been changed to 3 p.m. the day before the meeting. But think about this. There was no board discussion. There was no board approval. The tenants were not informed. They were not consulted. We just changed it and said it was so and required them to comply. It also means that these changes, it excludes the chair from polling for new deputants at meetings. I note a new proposal has been added that registration requirement may be waived when the deputant is a TCHC tenant. Really? That's kind of waffling. I expected better. So who decides? What is the criteria? We may not waive that necessity. Do we really need 2 different sets of rules for tenant stakeholders versus all other stakeholders? For the last year, 2 years, 5 years, you've only had tenant stakeholders deputing before the board. It's very rare that organizations come. But we really need to think about having a double process. Simply revert to the language in the existing board deputation policy, which says to stakeholders, while advance registration is preferred, it is not a requirement. That is the language that's in the board's policy. You're changing it to something else in your procedural rules. The board policy is a byproduct of the procedural rules. They need to say the same thing. They need to be consistent. So the procedural rules governs the board, and the board's deputation policy is for stakeholders, and that's what we follow. This policy has not been reviewed since 2010. Long overdue for a review. Can we please make a commitment to undertake a tenant consultation process to revise this policy? We know it doesn't work for you. We know it doesn't work for us. We need to come together and have a meeting of the minds. With regards to the vaccination requirement, the language does not indicate to whom a director must provide proof of being fully vaccinated. Is it the chair of the board? Is it the chair of the committee or the board secretary? So I think that should be clarified. And I want to seize this opportunity to suggest that Toronto Community Housing adopt City Hall procedures by creating an electronic distribution stakeholder list for board and committee meetings for people that indicate an interest in receiving them, along with a link to the deputation policy for stakeholders. And under the procedural rules where video conference is permitted, language should be included to allow for remote public stakeholders to depute in the same way as all other participants. You'll recall I voiced my concern that we created an entirely separate process to allow tenants to depute during COVID, which required them to participate by teleconference, but not to join via the WebEx meeting. They've been doing this at City Hall for a long time, and there's been no problems. There is no rationale for treating tenants differently. There is no additional cost to the corporation, nor was there any risk. The admin staff allow video and microphone access when the speaker's name is called by the chair and removes access following any questions. This is what they're doing at City Hall. Please ensure future participation is inclusive for all parties. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Catherine? Hearing none. Dara, I believe we have another deputant, Kathy Birch, has going to present her.
Ms. Birch, can you hear us?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. You have
Great.
5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I was part of the focus group meetings that were carried out. There was 3 of them, and there's a few things I'd like to bring to your attention. First of all, on the actual report on page 5 of 7, in the first paragraph, there's an error. First of all, it states in part, this concern appeared to be a consequence of a misunderstanding. There was not any misunderstanding, and for it to be represented that way is just, it's wrong. We didn't misunderstand. And further in the paragraph, it says, to clarify, the proposal is that the item to which the deputation relates would be considered following the regular agenda. No, it should read that it would be considered in the following regular agenda, because once you do the first part, then you go to the the consent agenda, then you go to the regular agenda, and that's when we hear all the items that have been held and going to be deputed on. So I'd like that language changed, first of all. Second, I'd like to bring to your minds that what was brought before us was based on what was done at the parking authority and what was being done at the City of Toronto as far as deputations. First of all, to compare the City of Toronto's deputation policy to ours is kind of like, considering they have like 5 million people that could depute, that's kind of like comparing, a Walt Disney cruise ship to a fishing boat. It's just not reasonable. And second, the parking authority, there's a big difference between people deputing on trying to decide if there should be parking on the east side of the street or the west side, compared to what we deal with at this board that impacts lives and the quality of life for thousands and thousands of tenants. So I think that to draw a comparison or direction or a model from either one of those is pretty absurd. So I want that clear. Further, on attachment 3, page 3, bullet number 5, it speaks to my comments in the focus group, and I feel my comments were not sufficiently represented in this report. I spoke to pre-pandemic issues, but virtual issues as well for people with disabilities. Virtual meetings and in-person meetings. When meetings are scheduled and it's on the website, people with disabilities who require PSWs, wheel-trans, and all of these things, they have to schedule around what you put on that website and what's being prepared. And so, it's not easy to change a scheduling for a PSW, let me tell you, because those agencies don't always have the manpower to accommodate that. And so it's challenging. So then when the meetings don't start on time, it affects how our PSWs come in. And if it's in person, you may not get to depute because wheel-trans is coming and the meeting started late, and now that you haven't gotten to that item. Mind you, I will say this, that anytime I personally have had to leave because the meetings have started late, they've made sure that I could depute before my wheel-trans would take me away. But the problem is it doesn't get heard with the item. And so you might be 3 items away from what I actually need to speak to. So it's not being heard with the item. Do I think it stays in the mind of our directors as to what exactly I said? No, and so it lessens the value of the deputation right off the bat. It just creates so many accessibility problems, and when you start pushing the tenants' deputations to the back of the bus, so to speak. It's a problem for people with disabilities. And that you have a duty to accommodate. And I know you meet that by letting us speak before our Wheel-Trans picks us up, but is it really fair and equitable when it's not with the item that it's addressing? I'm not sure it does. There are the proposed changes, just as Catherine had said, they don't work for us. It seems like it's all about squashing our voices, quite honestly. And this whole thing is about time management. And our staff, our management, they're not stupid. When they put these items together for the agendas, they know which ones are high touch. So you plan accordingly. But a couple of years ago, they reduced the number of board meetings. So now you've got a cram-packed agenda. And it's like, well, the only thing the items can't be deleted because they're critical for our board. So what's the thing we're going to squeeze the most? Let's squeeze the end users and our tenants. And that's what it feels like to us from what was being proposed.
Sorry. Ms. Birch, you're at 5
sorry?
minutes. Sorry, you're beyond
okay.
5 minutes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Can I just say, can I ask one? Can I say one more thing? I just want you guys to explain to me how on one side you can sit there and, you know, in board meetings and stuff and ask management and staff, how, you know, did you go out and get tenants' opinions and feedbacks on this, that, and the other thing, and you didn't do enough and you need to go back for more and everything else. And that's the direction this board gives our management and our staff, and they go out there and try and get as much as they can. And then this board tries to change the rules to actually silence our voices even a little bit. How do you reconcile that? How do you lead by example by trying to squash our voices? Thank you.
Are there any questions for Kathy? Marcel?
Hi. Excuse my ignorance on this, but as far as like accommodating people with disabilities, what would you suggest?
You know, one of the biggest things that can happen, Marcel, is appropriate timing and scheduling of these meetings so that when the meeting is supposed to start at 12:35, okay, maybe it doesn't start to 12:40, but it's not going to have a direct impact on the scheduling of you know, whether people get to depute because of Wheel-Trans rides or they don't get to stay on the WebEx meeting because they've got a PSW coming in. You know, like it's the timing and the scheduling that's critical. So what it is this board needs to really look at what's coming before it on a meeting-to-meeting basis. If they need to add meetings to fit the amount of business at hand, and nobody is saying that you guys don't have a lot of stuff to handle. You absolutely do, and a boatload of reading to do to get there. But we still need you to make sure that it's being scheduled so that everybody has time and can be heard. If you want it heard at the local levels, the regional levels, and the management levels, then it needs to be heard at the board levels.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One more. When it comes, yeah, I have just one more question.
Okay, go ahead, Marcel.
As far as like feeling like you're like tenants' voices are being, like, I'm a tenant, and you're saying that it feels like tenants' voices are being silenced. I don't even know, like, what would you suggest to that could make that change a bit, so that people could feel like they're being heard?
Marcel, they need to have more board meetings so that the agendas are not so cram-packed, so there's adequate time for tenants to depute, and make sure that the in-camera sessions end when they're supposed to, so that these committees and the board start on time and that there's adequate timing. You know, if you're going to ask, you know, for the way these are scheduled, if FM scheduled projects like this, you guys would be screaming at them. But the board schedule, you know, like it's not adequate to the volume of work that you have and the amount. The number of meetings were reduced, maybe, I think it was about 3 years ago. Add the meetings in. Spread the requirements out so that you can give everything the due diligence it's supposed to have.
Well, I think they're very good suggestions, Kathy, and I know we have looked at the possibility of having more meetings. One of the challenges is trying to schedule them because we have a number of constraints that impose themselves on us, that being city council meetings and city council committee meetings that 3 of our board members are part of, and trying to shoehorn meetings in and around that is not always the easiest to accomplish. And I mean, from my own perspective, it would be good to say, you know, every other month on the 3rd Thursday or something like that. But unfortunately, so we could all plan our lives and that more effectively. But it is I know, something we're hoping to do as best we can, but within the constraints that are placed on us as far as making sure that we have quorum and that. And I think one of the goals, hopefully from my perspective, we wanted is to, and we have it today, which I'm really pleased that we've got so many deputants at the governance committee, because I find that if we just have deputants at the board meetings, they're listened to, but we don't have the time to actually have a discussion around some of these concerns that are raised. And I feel that perhaps they're only maybe provided only lip service to deputants, and I would rather have conversations like today with people putting forward ideas so that we can, you know, go back, take a look at some of them and see how we can accommodate some of the suggestions and that come through the deputants.
It could be as simple as if you're going to add meetings, why not try adding a couple of evening meetings? Who says that where is it written that it has to be during business hours? You know, there's options out there. The same kind of investigation you would expect and request of our management and our staff, this board should be able to impose on itself.
Yeah, no, I agree. Good suggestions, and let's see if we can take some of those suggestions and look at how we can incorporate them.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions for Kathy? We have one more deputant, Jackie Yu, if she's available.
Our next deputant is Jackie Yu. We have one deputant after Ms. Yu, though, I'll note.
Oh, yes. Is Jackie available?
Yes, I'm here. It's my turn now?
Yes.
It is.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Directors. My name is Jacqueline Yu, and I live at 11 Solomon Street. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thought. I think it's very important to establish a subcommittee deputation focus group with agenda developed by tenants in order to ensure that tenants' concerns are heard. Very often, tenants are pushed to the edge without a place to voice the concern. Tchc not only has no channel for tenants to complain, and further shut all the channels to complain by decentralization, all the local management operation, and brings all elements of tenant service and local decision making led by the single regional general manager, without overseeing the actual operation within the local regional general manager's office, which possible lead to gang up, cover up, by using the corruption tenant engagement refreshment as a tool to corrupt the future development plan, indicator for the service performance measure, tenant table fund, and target of attack individual with tenant by using intimidation and corruption. The reality of our current tenants engagement refresh framework is faulty from the start. Tchc process appear to be quite weak. For example, there is no representative from 11 Solomon on 11 Solomon matter. Only 11 Solomon tenants should be representing of 11 Solomon Street and not the townhome tenants. You cannot say that tenants from townhome are representing all of the apartment building at 11 Solomon. Representatives as for the townhome tenant are self-interest in their own issue and are pushing for changes that are not helpful to the apartment building tenants. This is not fair, and each building should have its own representatives and at a minimum in number that are proportioned with the tenant population within each development. Secondly, there was no minimum number of tenants required to vote for community rep, and not notice were being put up. Thirdly, record keeping at Tchc is so terrible that it brings into question whether the Tchc actions are corruption or simply improper. Everything is non-transparency, including tenant engagement election, not open call to all tenants, not announce who is our community rep as today, and no notice were put up who is our prearranged or automatic appointed committee rep or management team and tenant engagement team freely to add or remove who is our community rep in Tchc official record and kept secret from tenants to suit the purpose of corruption and improper management. Tchc policy tenant rep require fellow tenant nomination in the nomination form in order to run as our committee rep. Unfortunately, is not the reality in our tenant engagement refresh. For one of our secret committee rep not even live in our project. For the quality, we should have the right to know as a tenant who is our fellow tenant nominate that secret committee rep. I did request from the management team and the tenant engagement from request who is our fellow tenant nominate our one of the secret committee rep, but my request being ignored. Our secret committee rep on record not live in our project, but lease as a tenant, but rent her project out for much higher rent for profit, which is real. But no one cares. That's a lot of tenants in our project do that. Under the eye is our management team turn the blind eye to it and partner with them, try to run some private business along with using tenant engagement as a tool. I just wondering why Tchc allowed the secret committee rep not live in our project, representing us without our consent or knowledge. Our general manager, letter date November 24, confirmed with me, tenant engaged with us with continued support by our general management, paid leadership role, continue to be control our project. In my view, which means continue allowed to be corruption, gang up and cover up our local decision making, future development plan, and indicated to the service performance, and freely to intimidate the weak tenants by community service coordinator. Regarding tenant Tchc, pardon me?
Jackie, if you could wind up, please, in the next few minutes.
Okay. My write-up is Tchc error in record keeping in leading to speaking involved party with respect to tenant matter, and the result is that the outcome is unjust and invalid by Tchc's own process as the appropriate representatives are not being consulted. This immediately raised the question as to whether, number one, there is actually engagement of tenants, and number two, whether the tenant engagement process is in the best interest of all. If only a select.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, Jackie, but we have to.
Listening.
And thank you. I realize you've also submitted a written deputation as well, which I appreciate. Now I'd like to ask if there are any committee members who would like to ask Jackie any questions to clarify her deputation. Here, no questions. Thank you very much, Jackie, for your deputation, and we'll look now to.
I believe the last deputant is Miguel Avila Velarde.
Miguel, are you online? Miguel?
Can you hear me?
No? I can hear you, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You're going to be speaking to the to item number 6, right?
That's correct. That's the reason I came to speak. And I want to acknowledge that we have a little demonstration outside 931 Young Street to raise awareness about tenants with disabilities. We are here at 931, and we have delivered 4 letters to Mr. Jack Sharma, who we require a prompt response. So I'm here to speak on item 6. I'm a tenant leader at 220 Oak Street. I have given numerous deputations before the board since 2011. Our input is valuable because we provide you with a second sober clarification to the debate. I don't believe you should be setting any limitations on deputations. We have deputed this very item before us, the rules of procedure, as pointed out by Councilor Fletcher at the meeting in February. Different tenants' voices, opinions, and perceptions will create an atmosphere of distrust, lack of transparency, honesty, and accountability. Many feel that what has been proposed is a sham to shut down tenants' voices. At its meeting on February the 9th, 2022, the Tenant Services Committee considered report TSC 2204 and directed management to consult the City Tenants First team and tenant directors in relation to proposed changes to the rules impacting tenants. Tenants First as staff advised what they have no particular concerns with the provisions of the board rules, and after reading the comments, I'm satisfied that we have put to rest some of the grievances put forward with many deputies who I want to acknowledge, Catherine, Kathy, and others, with regards to the proposed changes. My comments are my opinions, are in reference with attached document to be approved by the committee at the end of this meeting. Those who have given deputations do so because all other avenues to be heard are closed. We are experiencing sending emails and making phone calls to the appropriate managers in charge of the issue we're bringing forward. We get no response, or we're looking into it. Oh, well, we get back to you, Miguel. Don't worry. They do not to the end. A deputation to the board is our only forum for drawing attention to a problem, a systemic problem. Since the incorporation of the hybrid meetings in person or on Zoom or WebEx, for the record, I was expelled from a committee meeting on February 9, 2022, and no one else will be removed from a virtual meeting in Regent Park. I am the only one on the record that has been removed from a meeting sponsored by TCHC, staff, Toronto Police, Community Safety Unit, and residents of Regent Park. This action is shameful. It has set a bad precedent and general mistrust as to why tenants will bother to come to a Regent Park Safety Network meeting if their voices are going to be silenced. So I noticed that bullet point 17.6 asks the deputies how to behave on public meetings. I want to make clear that we are not volunteer. We are not a staff or TCHC. We are plain and simple volunteers, and we recommend that any word being related to conduct of tenants and deputations must be changed for guidelines for deputation and Zoom etiquette. So, in conclusion, I wanted to let you know that one of the reasons I came here today is to request the TCHC the opening of all the gyms and community rooms, because we find it very unfair that we are not allowed in to use these amenities when we have so many people struggling with mental health and physical health. So please try to open up those gyms and community rooms ASAP. And thank you so much for allowing me to speak. And I want to acknowledge John Krakovic for allowing me to be here at 931 lobby to do my deputation with proper accommodations. Thank you so much. And any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you very much, Miguel. If there are any questions for Miguel? Any questions? Hearing none. Dara, if you would just, because I think it was something you mentioned earlier with regards to, is it 17.4? There's going to be adjustment in that, and then.
Yes, so that's correct. So in the version of the document, I'll share the screen that I've got. In the document that we've provided to committee today, there is an error that I would like to address by the time this document gets to the board. I haven't done it unilaterally because frankly I didn't think it was my place to do it now that the document had been provided until the committee had a chance to deal with it. So 17.4 provides that the board can consider deputations on any item without regard to whether it's been previously considered by committee. This language, the second sentence, the public shall be permitted to make an oral deputation in relation to any matter that wasn't previously considered at a committee meeting, was intended to be deleted from the version of the rules that's provided to the committee today. And in the motion that we've prepared for today's meeting, asking the committee to approve the rules for consideration by the board, we're asking that the committee delete that sentence from section 17.4 in the version that is considered by the board at its meeting next week. So that the current practice of deputants being able to attend before either committee or the board to make deputations, regardless of whether the matter had previously been considered at the committee level, continues. The report that's before committee today asks for committee's approval of the meeting procedures that are attached to the report, subject to that change, and recommend and ask the committee to recommend that the board approve them as well. The process that we're starting, that we are following in seeking this approval, is consistent with direction that the City Council gave us last year to pass a bylaw that includes procedures for governing the place and proceedings of meetings of the board and its committees that needs to be approved by City Council in the form of a bylaw. We've been to committee, we went to GCHRC, we presented rules for the committee's consideration in May of last year, took those rules away and tried to make them more accessible, brought them back to committee in September. Consistent with direction the committee gave us at that time, we consulted with deputants. You heard from Ms. Birch on focus group process that we engaged with former deputants. Mr. Chair, you participated in that process, and Directors Charlebois and Farah, you participated in the last of the focus group. So I think you heard directly from some of the deputants, some of the concerns that they had. We've also, consistent with the advice of the Tenant Services Committee, reached out to the Tenants First team and to the city staff in relation to the rules that we are proposing, rule changes that we are proposing to make to the deputation process in the course of having the board adopt its rules of procedure. The request that we are making, I think, reflects the advice that we've heard from deputants through our focus group process of hearing their concerns about the changes that we would make to the deputation process. The rules that are attached to the report that you have today do away with the previous recommendation that we have deputations considered at the committee process, or at the committee meetings only. What we heard from deputants in the focus groups, and I think what you heard from deputants today, is that the opportunity to speak to the board is an important process that deputants appreciate and want to continue to retain. And so we're not proposing to make that change through the rules that we are having the board, recommending that the board adopt. At the same time, the board does need to have its own rules of procedure. It needs to have the tools that it requires in order to ensure that proposals from management that require the board's approval are considered and approved in a timely fashion. Insofar as many of those recommendations serve our tenants, we need to ensure that the board process means that we get to implement those practices in a timely fashion. As I say, we continue to propose that deputations would take place at the at both committee and the board. We have continued what is a current recommendation that there be a registration process for deputants who wish to speak to the board or its committees on adding items on the agenda, recognizing again the significance of that process for tenants who want to depute to the board. We would recommend that the board retain the authority to waive the registration requirement when it comes to deputants. But that same consideration doesn't necessarily apply in the case of other stakeholders who may not be tenants of TCHC, and that's the reason why we continue to recommend that the requirement continue that individuals who wish to depute to the board who aren't TCHC tenants registered prior to the meeting, so that we can manage the meeting process, ensure that the meetings start on time, to ensure that meetings conclude on time, and that we have the ability to address all of the items on the agenda in the course of the meeting. I'm sensitive to, and I hear the concerns that you've heard from deputants about the number of meetings. We can certainly, if that's the board's desire to schedule more board and committee meetings, take that away. It's not actually a matter that's addressed in the rules of procedure. So we think we can have the board approve the rules as presented, and if the board wishes us to consider scheduling additional board and committee meetings, we can do that as well. Finally, one of the concerns that we heard from deputants that we've tried to address is a concern with a proposal that was recommended that if there was a deputant who wanted to speak to a matter on the consent agenda, the matter would be pulled from the consent agenda and considered at the end of the board meeting. Frankly, the approach that we're taking in order to address that concern is to recommend that the board no longer try and allocate matters as between a consent and regular agenda. The consent agenda doesn't at present serve the purpose, I think, for which it was intended, which was to allow for matters that were not controversial to be addressed in a summary manner at the beginning of the meeting so that the board or its committees could get into the meat and potatoes of the matters on the agenda. Instead, we propose to list the matters on the agenda and allow anybody to speak to, depute to any of those matters, and to have the board then at the meeting, in the course of the meeting, canvass board members to find out if there's any matter that they want to hold for future for debate in the course of the meeting and to manage the agenda in that matter. That's the approach the city takes to running its committee and council meetings. What it means is that matters that aren't held on the agenda simply get approved in that summary manner. That might have occurred, frankly, today in relation to those middle matters that we spoke to, the annual general meeting process and the committee charters where there weren't any questions, there weren't any deputations. It might mean that in the future, those matters would simply get adopted at the beginning of the meeting. We'd move on to have more time to deal with the rest of the matters on the agenda without having to distinguish between items on the consent or regular agenda. So that's how we've tried to address the concerns that we heard from deputants through the focus group process. As I say, the next steps in this process would be to have the board consider these matters for approval, and if approved by the board, to refer them to City Council for approval in the form of a bylaw. Subject to any questions.
Thank you very much, Dara, for the summary. And I guess just would also like to, we've tried, I think, through the information and the input we've had through the focus groups and through other deputants to address as many of the questions as possible, to keep it as open a process as possible, while still realizing we have a responsibility to manage the affairs of the organization as effectively. So these are, I think, will be, I think, good set of rules that we can operate by and still keep all opportunities for tenants to depute any item that they wish to depute on, and with really no time restrictions to having their input put on the agenda. So with that, I would just ask for a motion, and I guess we just need to amend the one that's in the meeting a little bit, which says it is recommended that the committee approve the board of directors procedures in the form set out in the attachment, and within, I don't know how you would put it, Dara, with the exception of 17.4, you've got.
I've included language to ask that the committee approve the rules procedure amended to delete the second sentence in rule 17.4.
So if I could have someone to move that motion, that would be great. Thanks very much, Uba. Seconded by Marcel. Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? Hearing none, I'll ask for the motion. All those in favor? The motion is carried. And I think that's the last item, except for a motion to adjourn the meeting. Thanks, Marcel. Seconded, Uba. All those in favor? Motion carried. Again, thank you, everyone, for participating and for providing your input. It's appreciated. Thank you.